First thing you do, okay, be the nice guy. Down the line, okay, you start charging. The taxes go up, blah, blah, blah. But the first thing you do is you give them a break. Okay, you get their, you secure their allegiance. So the first thing, that's precisely what they did. The Seleucids wanted their allegiance, and so that's what they did. Fast forwarding 25 years later, 175 BCE, things changed. Well, for one, the original Antiochus, who was the one who originally conquered Judea, he was gone. And now you're dealing with his, I believe, his grandson. This is Antiochus IV, who was known as Epiphanes. Right? Epiphanes, I think, means the enlightened one. Does anyone know? Yeah, the enlightened
Epiphany
one?
means an enlightenment.
Enlightenment. But
Yes,
does that mean
like
he is enlightened, or
like a real...
something like that? Okay. He was called Epiphanes to distinguish him from the earlier Antiochus. And so he is the one who is instituting this new major, he launches this major reform program to forcibly Hellenize Judea. Okay, so we're talking on top of all this Hellenization that has gradually been infiltrating into the culture. Now he wants to basically make it mandatory that people should basically conform to the new standards. And so one of the things that basically happened in 175 is that there was, the high priest at the time was Jason. And Jason is a Greek name, but he was from the Sadducite lineage. Very important. Okay? He was from the Sadducite, the legitimate priestly lineage. I say this is very important because he was actually the last person who would be from that lineage, because the Hasmoneans were not Sadducites. They were priests, they were Kohanim, but they were from the outlying periphery. He was from Modian, right? Or from other place. Where was he from? Modian, right? The Maccabees were from Modian, which is a town. Which was a town in the outlying area of Jerusalem. So he wasn't, yes, he had his rights, okay? It was divided into groups, and so every group would have 1 month of the year where they would be entitled to serve and get all the proceeds that the temple generated, right? But he wasn't a high priest. He wasn't the high priest lineage. Jason was the last one from the high priest, and he bribed Antiochus IV Epiphanes to appoint him high priest. Okay, and so he became high priest, and apparently his brother or somebody else. He was from the lineage, but it doesn't mean that he in particular, he in person, would be the high priest. Okay. In other words, if anyone else wanted to bribe him, they wouldn't have succeeded either, because nobody would accept somebody from the non-Sadducite lineage. But he still had to bribe them because there's many other options as well. I mean, he's not the only Sadducite in town. So, Sadducite simply means a descendant of Tzadok. There were plenty of them around. Okay, so Jason secured the position of high priest, and another thing he did, he bribed, and this is what I read in all the sources that I read on this topic, he bribed the Seleucids to allow him to construct a gymnasium. Why would he have to bribe them for that? I don't understand.
He didn't know that he didn't have to bribe them.
Maybe what they mean is that the Greeks basically sent over their educational. I mean, gymnasium involved a whole phonem, right? It was a whole project. You had to bring over educators and culture, etc. And so it cost money, right? Where do you get your faculty? And so maybe he needed basically to pay to get in order to secure this support. Yeah, but at any rate, so Jason, at face value, it seems that he's a Hellenite. But wait, it gets better. What happens 2 years later? Now you have another person, Menelaus, okay, several years later, and he says, I want to be priest. So he gives an even bigger bribe. Or he promises a bigger bribe. He actually had to raid the temple in order to pay up, in order to actually deliver on that bribe. But he essentially says, appoint me, and I'll be even more loyal to you. I'll be an even better puppet king, or puppet ruler. And so the Greeks did precisely that. Why they did that? I think it might be that the Greeks didn't think that, even though Jason was a Hellenizer, they think that he's a Tzadokite after all. So he was a traditional Jewish leader, right? And so even though this Jewish leader had come very far from the original thing what Tzadokite stood for, the original concept of what priesthood and Yahweh cult would be like. But still, they didn't trust him politically, probably. And so that's why they preferred Menelaus over him. So Menelaus, there's actually some conflicting information about him, whether he was a legitimate priest even or not. He definitely wasn't a Tzadokite. There's some reports, I think Josephus says that he was from the tribe of Benjamin. I don't know. And some other people report that he was a priestly lineage. I don't know which one is the case, which one is true. I think that it's unlikely that the people would have accepted a Benjaminite as high priest. I mean, that's way too far. So I think that he was priestly. He wasn't Tzadokite, but he was priestly, which would actually run in the face of the traditional Jewish belief that a Tzadokite is the only legitimate. Obviously, if you look at the priestly literature, there's this covenant between Aaron, right? Between Aaron and God, that God gives Aaron the right for the priestly office until the end of time. So this will run in the face of that covenant, of that promise. So I don't know, but that would be more tolerable than at least a Benjaminite. So anyway, so Jason one of the things he did was he built a gymnasium, he built a euphebium. It's a Greek word, I think it means an academic place. Maybe it's higher education than gymnasium, and it focuses more on academics than on physical aspects. And the other thing is he wanted to convert Jerusalem into a polis, P-O-L-I-S. Polis is the term for a Greek city-state. Okay, so a polis had a certain definition to it. It involved obviously a gymnasium, it involved a certain democratic system, electing a ruler through voting. It involved participation in the Olympics, sending your representatives once in 4 years. You would participate in the Olympics. And in fact, the Judeans did precisely that, and they actually sent a contingency to the Olympics at Tyre, T-Y-R-E. Am I pronouncing that word right? Tyre or Tyre? The biblical Tzor. Tyre? Okay, so he sent, it's the biblical Tzadi Vav Resh. Tzor, Tyre. So he actually sent athletes to that game, and it's interesting to note that they were Hellenized to some extent, but they were still Jewish, and the tradition was to offer tribute to the local deity, but they said, no, we're going to give you money to support you, whatever, you can do whatever you want to do, but we're not going to honor the local deity. So we see that they're still hewing to their religion, not to accept foreign gods, not to worship foreign gods. And so that's noteworthy. But on the other hand, they're participating in an event that is essentially pagan, right? I mean, this whole entire event was dedicated to Zeus, to a pagan god. And that's how the whole Olympics revolved around Zeus. So that's another thing. Okay, so you have Jason. Jason is deposed, Menelaus is appointed, and then Menelaus obviously has to deliver on this bribe that he promised. So he plunders the temple. The temples in the ancient Near East were very rich. They had a lot of money. Don't ask me how, but they had gold, silver, expensive vessels, and all of this, well, not all of this, but at least some of this, was appropriated by Menelaus and handed over to the Seleucid king, who was Antiochus Epiphanes. So another thing what happened at the time is Antiochus was embarked on a campaign to try to conquer Egypt. And so the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, so he wanted to gain more territory. And he actually made it into Egypt, but the Romans repelled him.
Who said they already?
No, not the Ptolemies. The Greeks did. But remember, this after. Right. Alexander conquered everything, right? But the Seleucids only controlled Syria. The Ptolemies controlled Egypt. Judea was in the middle. And 200 they conquered Judea. But after that, in 168, they wanted to expand even further, and so he made it actually all the way into Egypt, and he would have actually conquered Egypt if not for the Romans. Okay, the Romans were the rising power at the time, and the Romans didn't want any single guy to have too much control. So the Romans would rather stick up for the underdog here, which would be the Ptolemies, rather than allow the Seleucids to gain too much control over the Near East and then make their way and then eventually crush Rome itself. So the Romans sided with the Ptolemies, and so they had to retreat, and so they had to leave. On his way back, Menelaus all these campaigns cost a lot of money. Military campaigns cost money. And so what's the natural thing to do? You pass through Jerusalem, you have this rich temple here. So what do? You do further pillaging, okay? Further destroying, plundering, and causing, wreaking havoc. And so this act, what happened now, was outrage and infuriating the Judean population. Okay? What he did was plundered the temple and massacred people. Many people died in this event. And people obviously resisted it, so he crushed them. He killed people, and he erected a fortress. It's called the Akra fortress. He erected that in Jerusalem, overlooking the Temple Mount. And he stationed a garrison there, and the garrison was stationed there for the next 27 years. And the purpose of that was to secure the Seleucid control and to make sure that no revolt resurfaces again. And so this is the critical time when he broke ranks basically with the population, and he branded himself as an enemy, right? As somebody who is not cooperating, right? He's
What year was that? What year was that again?
This is 168. 168. A year later, that's when all the bans were issued. That's when he decided, we're going to outlaw Judaism altogether. So circumcision was outlawed, Sabbath observance of the festivals was outlawed. He brought in a pig and sacrificed that on the altar in Jerusalem. So now he's adding even more fuel to the fire. And it's just intolerable what he's doing. It's crazy. Like, what's going on here? How is this possible? A pig in the temple. And so what happened is that so he's forcing. So you have a new phenomenon happening here. Now he's forcing people to disobey, to violate their own religion.
And this is the Jewish guy?
No. This is Antiochus Epiphanes. Menelaus was the priest. Menelaus was Jewish, and he is cooperating. So yes, you have a Jewish guy who is essentially working with a Greek pagan, Rusha Marisha, and he is essentially giving sanction.
He was the one who pilfered the temple.
Yes,
That's what
Menelaus helped Antiochus in this thing. So now you have all this going on, and first of all, let's note the significance of this event. Religious persecution, it didn't exist, period, until this event. As far as we know from history, religious persecution is a new thing invented by the Greeks, 167 BCE, and applied against the Jews. Did you say something? Oh, what was the reason? We didn't get to that yet. But the first thing we should note is the overwhelming significance of this. I mean, what's going on here? Nobody had ever done that. The Babylonians, the Persians, I mean, it was all political, right? You wanted them to pay your taxes, to pay your tribute. Maybe they would, introduce their own gods, but it wasn't forcing them. It was more like, I'm more powerful, so obviously, Yahweh didn't help you, so you might as well come to my God because my God is more powerful.
Jews never killed pagans in the whole book of...
Pardon me?
Jews didn't kill the pagans, like when they were going to get the...
It happened later. The Hasmoneans did that later, yes.
No, I'm saying the Jews killed the pagans when they were in the fifth book of Torah. They have their going to the land.
Yehoshua, she's talking about.
Yeah, but that's not religious persecution. They're not forcing them to convert. It's military. It's military. They're just wiping them out because they need the territory, right? They wanted to settle there. So it's nothing against their religion. It's against.
Well, it seemed like because they were still making genocide against people who wanted.
Yeah,
Political. It wasn't religious based.
it's in later writers of the Bible, they try to couch that in a religious formula. But the reality of the situation was, and if you look at the account carefully, then you'll detect that reality is that the conquest 1200 BC, the conquest of Israel at the time, was material. They needed a land, they needed a place to settle, and that was the end. And so they kicked out, they wiped out the inhabitants. Either leave or we kill you. It's simple as that. Get out of here. Get out of my way. It had nothing to do with religion.
It had nothing to do with vow, they didn't like vows.
Yeah, of course, but that's between them and themselves. Obviously, Yahweh is the one who is giving them all these successes in battle. So, of course, you're going to worship Yahweh instead of Baal.
You had showdowns, there weren't showdowns between their God and God.
Yeah, there is, but like I said, there is no religious persecution. This is voluntary. They are choosing Yahweh because they believe that Yahweh is sticking up for them. So the people that themselves are choosing, we want to worship Yahweh instead of any other God.
Some are saying that they had a choice whether to join the religion or not. Is that true?
Pardon me?
When they were conquering the land, people had a choice whether they would join the religion or not? Is that
No,
true?
not in the Canaanite conquest. There was no such choice. There was no such choice.
They had
It's
three
not-
choices. One was either to leave, two, to observe the Shabbat Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, or fight. Am I wrong?
I'm not aware of such a thing. Of Shem Mitzvah, not for the Canaanites.
Is anyone aware of such a
Maybe
thing?
for other nations,
No.
tributary
They
nations.
had- No, they were told get out, or not even get out, just clean the place out. We're coming in, you get out. It's pretty simple.
Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, I think, applies to other nations. But anyway, the Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach are not mentioned anywhere in the Bible, so it's not. This is a rabbinic concept. It's not. It's not mentioned at the time. Okay, so you have. So we're talking about this plundering. We're talking about this religious oppression.
Why?
So now the question of why, right? So why?
So you heard different.
So there's several theories on this. Why did he do this? Okay, one theory is that he didn't really do it. It was Menelaus. Okay, Menelaus, he had backing within the Jewish people. Menelaus was obviously Jewish. He was a priestly lineage, and he must have had. So he was part of the aristocracy, and he at least had some element of the aristocracy joining him in this movement. More likely than not, some level of the population was also wanted to be Hellenized, and so you had a certain segment of the population that wanted this. They were begging essentially Antiochus, please, come in, introduce to us your Greek ideas, your Greek culture. We're not interested in Shabbat, we're not interested in circumcision. We don't want that. And, this was a day when democracy had yet to be invented, so there wasn't such a thing as pluralism. It's all or nothing. So these people that are trying to force a new culture upon the land, okay? So it's either Greek culture or Jewish culture, and so they wanted basically to convert Judea into a Hellenistic culture, a Greek city-state, which would include wiping out all elements of Jewish religion, including the signs of the covenant that we mentioned earlier. So that's the first explanation, that it was instigated from within. The second explanation is that he believed that there was a religious motivation, a religious force driving this whole political opposition and this whole cultural opposition. Now, it is possible to reconcile culture with religion, and we've seen that, right? In the last 100 years, when Judea was ruled by the Seleucids, they were still religious, and they still adopted Greek culture. So there is a possibility of reconciling the two. However, he believed, Antiochus, he sensed that at this point, and he might have brought it on upon themselves by being too harsh, but the bottom line is that he sensed that the religious force was standing in the way of achieving political control over the land. In other words, he thought that there was political and cultural resistance that stems from cultural, religious ideas. So he said, okay, let's wipe out the religion, stop circumcising, stop observing the Sabbath, and there won't be a problem. If it only was that simple, right?
Who's saying this?
That's Antiochus Epiphanes saying that. But he's actually making matters worse. Because now he's making enemies, he's making them even bigger enemies, right? Not only has he banned religion, not only has he forced them to convert, now he's making them now he's pissing them off even further. So now you have this revolt. Okay, so you have this revolt, and according to the story that goes that in Judean, there was an official from, an emissary, a delegate from the king, who came to the towns of Judea, and it was routine for them to do this. They went to a town, they brought the elders of the town over, and they were using them setting them as an example, as a model. You bow before the idol, you sacrifice to Zeus, or to Olympia, whatever that name is, to the Greek god, and people will accept that as a result. That was the idea. And so they did this in Judean, and suddenly you have this little guy, he wasn't little, he was actually old. His name was Mattatyahu, and not only is he refusing to sacrifice and to give homage to this Greek deity, but he actually executed the person, the Jew, who did give homage, and the official, and the Greek official. Outrageous, right?
Act of war.
Act of war, 100% act of war. I mean, this is definitely the death penalty, easily. They would wipe out the whole town for an offense like this. So he fled to the mountains, and he had a following. People followed him. So obviously he wasn't alone there. Okay, people didn't have the courage maybe to step forth and do that first. But once he did it, there were people from the town and from the vicinity that rallied around him and supported his campaign, which is essentially to subdue, to vanquish, and drive out the Greeks, the Seleucids, and reinstitute the Jewish cult in Jerusalem, and legalize, obviously, and encourage the observance of Jewish.
What year was this?
Well, so this is 164 BC. So this is 3 years after they originally imposed all these bans. So 3 years later, you have the Maccabee revolt. So this is a very important year to remember. 164 or 163, I'm not sure, 164 BC.
Why were they called Maccabees?
But there is several explanations for that. One, Maccabee is a hammerer, a hammerer. Well, what does a hammerer have to do with anything? So that might have been his occupation, or it could be a figurative use of the term to indicate somebody who excels in militarily. A hammerer, yeah.
I heard the word macabre comes from Maccabee. I don't know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, somewhere.
Yeah, macabre meaning in what way?
You know, macabre means kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily murder. It's killing. It's death related. It's sadness, but.
With a kuf or with a kaf?
I know it's M-A-C-A-B-R-E.
It might have been the letter actually might have been changed over the years. It might have originally been with a kaf because the hammer is probably spelled with a kuf, not a kaf. But in later years, I'm not sure about that. Yes.
I just wanted to go grumble.
All right.
And so we're gonna
wrap it up now.
We're wrapping it up right
Okay,
now.
question.
Then, one second, then, if anybody wants to continue this, which I'm sure many people will, just gather around closer.
Yeah, what happened after that? They conquered and what
I
happened?
want to hear a little longer.
No,
Okay.
it's a very
That's-
good.
that's-
It's
I know he's very good.
let him go.
Yeah, well,
Kill me.
people
I
walking
sacrifice myself. But again, I'm just saying,
Why
get a little
should-
bit-
We don't have a cross here.
Okay, let's continue then. All right. So you have this revolt, the Maccabean revolt. So I'm sure the whole area, the whole land is talking about it. It's a major event happening here. We're going to have finally Jewish independence. Remember that in the last 400 years there hasn't been Jewish independence. Okay, the Persians, under the Persian rule, Judea was simply a province. It was a precinct under the Persian Empire. So now finally we're going to kick out those Greeks altogether. Okay, not only are we going to get religious independence, but we're also going to get political independence. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember, that he championed not just religious freedom, but he also wanted to reinstitute the monarchy. And we're going to see that later, that the Hasmonean rulers adopted the name of king. And even before they adopted that name officially, they still ruled and still tried to invoke this imagery and the language that was traditionally used by the Bible, right? By Samuel and Kings, this imagery of the monarchy, okay? This legitimacy that God stamps upon the official monarchy of Israel.
586 BC was the last time.
Was the first exile was 586? Yeah.
That was the last time they had a king, right?
Yes, correct. 586. So, yes. So we're really going back. We're reinstituting
586
monarchies.
to 163.
Right. To 163. Right.
What was the
Okay.
Hasmonean?
It's not clear. Most scholars believe that an ancestor of Judah Maccabee, or actually Mattathias, right? Mattathias was the original Maccabee. An ancestor of his was named Hasmonean, which was a Greek name again. Probably. Yeah, like I said, the names were Greek. They were religious. They were Jewishly. I mean, as far as religion was concerned, they still kept the Shabbat and circumcision, etc.
Don't a lot of this year today name their kids Alexander?
Exactly, right. Right, exactly.
names
That's my
being
point.
Greek, does that mean they actually became Greek, or it was just like part of
And you came in the middle of the discussion, obviously, since you're asking this question. So yeah, we said that the Jews from 323 BC, from 330 from the time that Alexander conquered Judea until the start of the persecution, they became Hellenized, okay? More and more and more, but they never abandoned their religion. So they had Greek names, they might have lived in a Greek polis. If you didn't live in Jerusalem or in the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem, then you probably lived in a Greek city-state, but you still pledged allegiance to the Jewish religion and to the Jewish cult in Jerusalem. So you would still go up there 3 times a year, presumably, if they did their duties, if they performed their duties properly, and you would still have that allegiance to the Jewish religion. So despite the fact that you had a Greek name. So yes, it was possible to have a Greek name and speak Greek.
And just like us having in English, people, name the kids.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't have
So yeah, so this,
Basically, you're saying that there was a Jewish state, Israel at that time?
the one. Which years are you talking about? Are you talking about the Ptolemaic years or the Seleucid years?
After the revolt, the Maccabees.
Oh, after the Maccabean revolt. Oh, so we're getting to that now. Okay, after the Maccabean revolt, they attempted to establish a Jewish state. It wasn't so easy. So what happened is that obviously the Greeks are going to respond, right? They're not going to let things happen and run out of control. So they sent armies, several armies in fact, against these revolutionaries, these people, and they were trying to restore order, but they failed. Okay, Mattathias was already very old, so he died. So after Mattathias, you have Judas Maccabee, and he was very successful militarily.
Isn't the Romans back?
Yes, very good point, thank you. So one of the actual reasons why they were so successful is because the Romans, they had the tacit, they didn't provide material support as of yet. It didn't give them weapons or it didn't send them troops. But the Rome, like I mentioned earlier, they were a rising power. They were the rising star, right? They were the next thing, tomorrow's superpower. And so, and their approval, okay, their approval meant a lot to the Judeans. So they felt essentially that they have a major power backing them up. So that provided moral support for their campaigns. So that's one thing, one critical thing that is that I would attribute to the success of the Maccabees. Another thing was they were charismatic. They were priests. They were trained in leadership, obviously, for many, many centuries. They were trained in leadership, and they were, in a way, they were Hellenized, so they knew the Greek ways of battle. So they weren't as primitive as you might think they were. Okay, they never maybe fought at a sophisticated battle, but they learned pretty easily. And they. Another thing is that that over the years, originally the Ptolemies, the Seleucids were still strong, but over the next several decades, the Ptolemies were becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, and so eventually it was becoming easier for the Judeans, for the Maccabees, to carve out their own little kingdom, their own little state, because the power of the Greeks were declining in response to Rome, most likely. But the fact of the matter is that the Seleucids, their power was declining.
Eventually, the Romans, did they eventually back their arms and stuff?
Eventually, I'm not aware of at any time backing them with arms, but eventually the Romans essentially would repel Greeks from launching further campaigns in Judea because they didn't want them to stay out of here. This is my sphere of influence. Right? And the Romans were very powerful at the time, and the Greeks didn't want to start up with them because, like I said, the Greeks were becoming weaker. And at a certain point in time, the Greeks simply wouldn't even bother. Okay, they're more afraid of the Romans than they were of the Jews.
So the Romans let Israel have their
Yeah, essentially through the backing of the Romans, the Greeks would stay out of Judea. But the downside of this is that eventually Judea itself becomes conquered by the Romans, which eventually happened. So you have this few decades in between when Judea thought that I have independence and things are going good. So how many did they have independence? Okay, so there were many battles going on from 163 until finally 140 BC. So this is about 20 years. First you have Judah Maccabee, and he was killed in battle in the end. Then Jonathan, his brother, right? He had several brothers. So his brother Jonathan took over in 152 BC, all right, and he was much more cooperative. Essentially, he reached some level of truce with the Greeks after they finally realized we can't beat them. So they agreed to an armistice, and they agreed to some level of understanding. They rescinded their religious persecution.
What year is this?
This is 152 BC, so this is 11 years after the original Maccabean revolt. So at this point, they're basically saying, okay, I've had enough, let's agree to some level of understanding, and I'm going to revoke the religious persecution, and you just stop fighting and behave yourself. And he actually did not require any no taxes, you don't need to pay taxes. He was made high priest, right? Jonathan was made high priest. So here you have the first example of a Hasmonean becoming high priest. Okay, he was, Judah, was Judah high priest? I don't think so. Judah Maccabees was not, right? Yeah, so Jonathan must have been, Yochanan Kohen Gadol. He was the first high priest. Right? So no, he was not tzaddik. Right, that's what I mentioned earlier. The Hasmoneans were not, they were priests.
They were Kohanim.
They were definitely Kohanim, but not tzaddik. Yeah. So Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he was Kohen Gadol, but he was not a tzaddikite.
But Maccabees Kohanim.
Yes.
Every single one.
Yes. It's all the same family. The Maccabees are the same family.
We're talking thousands of soldiers here.
No, Maccabees is the ruling class.
Who were the insurgents?
Oh, the group that was ragtag, there was all sorts.
Jews that
Yeah, there was ordinary people, peasants who supported him. Everyone supported him. Not everyone, but there was a large cross section.
a lot of Jews. They killed a lot of Maccabees.
No, they did not.
They weren't forcing circumcision on the secular Jews and killing on the secular Jews.
No,
What
not
I
that.
read was the original Maccabean war wasn't really directed against the Seleucids, but really were directed against secular Jews. That's what we
I'm not aware of the Jews using violence to enforce the Jewish religion. However, Menelaus, like I mentioned earlier, Menelaus was this major radical Hellenizer. He was basically passively okaying the Greeks using violence against, using force. I'm not aware of it. Maybe it happened. I'm not aware of it. Maybe you're confusing that with the forcible conversion of the Idumeans, which happened later. So he did forcibly convert. Eventually, the Maccabees forcibly converted the Idumeans in the south. So yes, they used violence to achieve religious conformity, actually conversion, right?
That's not Jew on Jew.
That's not Jew and Jew. That's against the Idumeans, who were descendants from the Edomites. So they're not. That's something else. Okay, so what happened is 141 BC. This is a very important date. That's when Jonathan's brother. Okay, so now you have another person coming to the fore. His name was Simon. Okay, Shimon Kohen Gadol. Now he becomes priest, and he